We have the 1, 2, 3s in the room where you can press the button. A lot of hospitals are worried about because they're like, now I'm making a commitment when they press 1, 2, or 3. I'm going to have to go to that room within 10 minutes. That's really tough. What happens if someone presses it by accident? Wasted time. All these scenarios as to why not. And I asked one of our best customers, how do you handle that? What if the patient presses just to see what happens or by accident? He said, if they press it by accident or even just a test and someone shows up within 5 minutes and says, can I help you? He said, we just created a moment for them, a moment that they tell their friends and family about. And their HCAHPS scores, just by having them in the room, even in rooms where they're not being pressed, jumped up in some cases 25%.
Hello everyone, I'm Mike Duggan and welcome to Beyond the Bedside. Today we'll be discussing how hospitals can listen smarter in real time to improve both patient and staff experience. For this conversation, Steve Peltzman, CEO of FeedbackNow, will be joining us. FeedbackNow is changing how hospitals listen and respond, shifting from delayed post-stay surveys to real-time feedback that arrives while the patient is still in the room. Hospitals using FeedbackNow report an average 15% uplift in HCAHPS scores. At one health system, the non-clinical workload on nurses dropped by about 30%, freeing them to spend more time on direct patient care instead of chasing maintenance or environment issues. Steve, as CEO of FeedbackNow, is leading this transformation for hospitals. He brings deep experience in blending technology, behavioral science, and operations to help hospitals turn feedback into meaningful action. Under his leadership, FeedbackNow is helping hospitals move beyond legacy patient feedback methods to become listening organizations that act sooner, better, and more empathetically. Steve, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you for accommodating me.
Oh, you bet. It's great to have you on. Hey, but before we jump into how FeedbackNow is, enhancing the patient experience, why don't we help our viewers get a little bit of information about you? So tell me, what's something about your career journey that might surprise people?
Sure. I have a really, really weird life path. My career started after college. I was a Air Force officer, so I was in the U.S. Air Force for 7 years, active duty, working on stealth aircraft, stuff that I can't talk about on a podcast, kind of cool stuff. And after that, I went from stealth bombers to business school to a startup, and then to the Museum of Modern Art where I ran technology. So I went from stealth bombers to modern art. And
That's quite the range, Steve.
yes, it was a really strange left turn there, but the Museum of Modern Art was also amazingly interesting. That job was like 10 different jobs in once. There's like retail, there's security, there's audio visual. There was all sorts of aspects to it that made it great. And I was there for a good 10 years. And then from there, I went to a public company. So I went from the nonprofit to a public company, Forrester Research, and ran technology there. We ended up acquiring FeedbackNow in 2018. And I decided after 13 years at Forrester, I wanted to, stick my toe into more of a CEO role. And I took over the business inside Forrester, but it didn't sort of line up with Forrester the way we envisioned. And I ended up partnering with VC Group, and we engineered a spin out in 2024 last year. And so
interesting. Wow.
But here I am.
Just all over the place to get where you are. It's, journeys often are like that. And thank you for your service. Appreciate that. So, when you're looking at, I guess, your leadership career, if you had to sum up your leadership philosophy in one word or a mantra, what would that be?
I'm a big fan of this concept called the accountability ladder. Everyone thinks of accountability as blame. In the accountability ladder concept, it's really about awareness and ownership. And like, if you're at the bottom of that ladder, they teach you that that's where you don't know and you're a victim and things happen to you, which early on in my career, I was a little bit prone to that. Like, I was I was okay with myself if there was something I could blame it on. And where if you're is higher on that accountability ladder, you're accepting the hand you've been dealt and you're being creative about finding solutions and you're owning it. You're not waiting for someone else to own it. You're not like, well, it's someone else's problem. You're like, it's my problem. And you're just finding creative ways to make it happen. And I think that's the turn that I had to make in my leadership journey. And it's something that I preach, to my team as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And my goodness, in your explanation, you've certainly led in very different industries. What's the common thread that you've seen between great service and great leadership?
Uh, I think that when there's mission and purpose, suddenly things are the same. Like I talked about in the Air Force, everyone was very obviously passionate about what we're doing. We were all, there by volunteer choice, to serve the country and all this stuff. And people's lives were literally on the line. And I joke that at the museum, sometimes people felt the same way, even though people's lives weren't on the line. It felt like, because everyone was so passionate about the mission of art. And, the, the same thing holds with Feedback Now. We're very passionate about our mission. I think I would have trouble if I was like making paper cups or something like that. But when you're
Yeah,
trying to revolutionize things, when you're trying to be a disruptor, or when you have a mission for, culturally with art, or if you're trying to protect the country, it's the passion drives the leadership and the accountability and all the other stuff. So I think that was the common thread that I thought about when we talked about this question.
that's interesting. Certainly, I mean, leadership is uh, a huge topic, right? I mean, there's so many different places out there, coaches and this whole body of work about leadership. But so much of it really does come back to accountability. As you can imagine, I talk a lot about that with my clients, hospitals and the leadership, and also, of course, what their mission, vision, and values are is so critical that we are in alignment and clear on those things. When you think about, those experiences in your life, what did you learn about how to truly listen at scale, if you will, that healthcare leaders could apply now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, listening is tends to be about, people hear, oh, you should listen at scale. You think that the answer to that is surveys, and really surveys have become kind of like the de facto thing, the de facto tool that people use. If I'm doing a survey, I am listening. And it's certainly not wrong, right? I mean, you are asking questions and you are getting answers. But I think where Feedback Now comes in, where our philosophy is that, you could listen. It's one thing to listen, like, think about like you're at the grocery store. You see 8 lines, but only one's open, and it's a super long line.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you could listen at scale by giving out a survey, and I could say the lines are really long. But listening at scale is looking at the people in that one open line and their faces and going, something's wrong here. I got to react. And there's no fundamental way to do that. So everyone relies on the survey. And so I guess the point I'm rambling to is that I think part of listening at scale is actually figuring out what's going on every minute of that experience and trying to have the exact right response. Or even beyond that, being predictive, like, hey, if I know that if I can track the number of people who came into that grocery store and I know that that's going to lead 20 minutes later or whatever the number is to a long line, then let me go ahead and use that as the trigger to open 3 or 4 more lines. And I think hopefully I'm getting across the point that it's like listening at scale is beyond just asking questions when you went home. It's taking that listening and embedding it into the experience itself
Yeah,
in a
it's a
way
great
that isn't
example.
friction.
Yeah, yeah, and that's real time, right? It's great that you asked me about my long line, when I get home or 2 days later, but it's
And I
even better
left.
if you have, yeah, if you notice it in real time and just fix it. That's great.
Yeah,
So that's really interesting.
I
I,
love
I,
how
I
like when
appreciate it.
hotels give you a survey, It's like, why am I'm gone. I'm never coming back. Why do I want to help you? I want to,
Exactly.
help me when I'm there. Is I
You know,
guess is the
I've deleted no less than like 5 or 6 surveys from my email today that I'm simply not going to take the time to do, because you're right. You get them for every single thing. They're always after the fact, and for a lot of reasons, I don't feel like I need to offer feedback for the transaction I just had. Um, because it's just not meaningful. I appreciate you sharing that. Let's switch gears and really talk about feedback now, and why this service matters for hospitals. Hospitals already measure patient experience. So, what's missing, and how does feedback now fill that gap?
Yeah, I mean, the same thing applies, right? So I gave the supermarket example, but think about it as the patient. What a I can't think of too many more experiences, maybe flying, I don't know, where you lack the control that you normally have in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least with flying, you're wearing your own clothes, right? When you're in a hospital, you're typically in a gown, with the back open or whatever. Like it's a very
Sure.
uncontrolled, you're at the mercy of everybody, depending on how sick you are or hurt you are. You're at everyone's mercy, yet there's an experience there, and hospitals do the same thing that everybody else does. They send you a survey, HCAHPS, Press Ganey, whatever it is, when 30 days after you get home or whatever the time frame is, and it's like I've left. It doesn't help me. So I think understanding that it's such a special case that they don't feel control. Their stress levels because they're sick are extraordinary versus other situations, a typical customer experience situation. That's why I think patient experience and customer experience, they can be the same, and people think of them the same, but they're very different because one is I'm there by choice, the other one is I wish I wasn't there. So I think that the control aspect and the nuances of that customer experience, if you will, need to be taken into account. And there's really weird, like I never thought about it before, but when you're a patient, for example, and you want something that's not urgent, how do I find HBO on the TV? My coffee is cold. I need an extra creamer, whatever it is. Your choice at that moment typically is to press the call button and bother the nurse, who you could either be asking a nurse who's very busy doing clinical tasks to do something, inconveniencing them greatly, um, or you rightly, I think, feel guilty and you don't want to press that button. Therefore, you're sitting there waiting for someone to come in the room to tell them. And again,
Mm-hmm. That sounds
control,
right.
bad thing. And I'll talk about this more later, but in one hospital, Montefiore in the Bronx, and a few others, we're taking our technology and giving almost like a intermediary call button, like press one for housekeeping, need help, press one for housekeeping, two for food service, three for maintenance. And just by having that there, you've solved so many different problems. You've taken all the nurses' non-clinical tasks for those requests away. They don't have to call those departments. You've given those departments immediate control to respond, so they're not being blamed if the nurse couldn't get to ask them the question for 2 hours later because they were busy. So you're actually giving the power to those support organizations. But for the patient, most importantly, you're giving this back control in a way that even a lot of hotels don't have. Or
Mm-hmm.
yeah, bring pick the call button in an airplane, but it's I typically don't want to do that too because I feel guilty. So just with that one little bit um, of functionality, we've like really just rewired that experience in those hospitals. So
Yeah, I love that
that
idea of that real time, aspect of that, and also the appropriation of, hey, this request will get taken care of sooner by the appropriate party versus this intermediary. It oftentimes is a nurse or a PA or a doctor or anyone walking by, right, in your room. I've been there, and I have felt that guilt that you mentioned. Let's dig in a little bit. Can you share a couple examples where real-time feedback has changed, a hospital team's day and overall HCAHPS scores?
Yeah, sure. So in another hospital, we put our green, yellow, and red buttons. You've probably seen them in the airports, whatever. We've put them in the restrooms of the hospital. So use the restroom, the public restrooms of the hospital, and there's a sign that says in multiple languages that says, tell us how you feel about the cleanliness of this restroom. Green, you push green, yellow, red, and it's a physical button, so they know they're not going to have to, you know, ask. It can't ask five more questions, and people, you'd be surprised, very high rate of people press those buttons. What we showed that hospital is a couple of things. First thing we showed them is that we showed them since each restroom is instrumented with one of these devices, we know exactly when and where people are saying, down to the second, people are saying green, yellow, and red. So what we gave them is data over the course of the first couple of weeks that showed when they were getting a preponderance of reds. And of course, it was like, later in the day, and they had peanut buttered their shifts. So just looking at the charts and understanding the trends, they were able to redistribute the staffing and even out those greens, and sand off those red, the number of reds that they were getting at different times of the day. And so with the same staff, they got more efficient, and it hugged and highly correlated with the HCAHPS scores around the questions of cleanliness. So we showed them their scores after a few weeks, and up and down to the course of the week, whatever, just really tight on the HCAHPS scores. And so every point, what we figured out mathematically is every percent of up or down that our devices produced was about a zero point 0.6 correlation up and down effect on HCAHPS scores for those questions as well. So really tight. In the case that I was talking about before, another moment that I thought about as an answer to the question was, we have the 1, 2, 3s in the room where you can press the button or whatever, which is really something, by the way, that a lot of hospitals are worried about, because they're like, well, now I'm making a commitment. When they press 1, 2, or 3, we get this pushback a lot that, I'm going to have to go to that room within 10 minutes. That's really tough. And what happens if someone presses it by accident and whatever? Now I wasted time. All these scenarios as to why not to do it. And I asked, one of our best customers, a guy named Tim Woodward at Montefiore. I said, how do you handle that? What if the customer, I did it again. What if the patient presses just to see what happens, or by accident? And I said, is there a lot of fret over that? Is there a lot of like, oh, that was terrible? He said, quite the opposite. He said, if they press it by accident or even just a test, and someone shows up within 5 minutes and says, can I help you? He said, we just created a moment for them. Even if we do nothing, if they say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't remember pressing, I must have pressed it by accident. It doesn't matter. He's like, we just created a moment that they tell their friends and family about. And it's a big moment. And their HCAHPS scores, just by having them in the room, even in rooms where they're not being pressed, jumped up in some cases 25% for the
Oh, wow, that's significant.
yeah. And
Yeah,
it's
that's
just
amazing. Wow, that's yeah.
yeah. And they even had a nurse. They had an issue where a particular nurse was being, I don't know, not abusive, but I would say, mean or whatever to this one patient. And the patient pressed the food service button to get, because otherwise, who would you complain to, right? Do you wait for the patient advocate to show up? So I think this person pressed like 2 for food service, and they went, the nurse is doing this to me or whatever, and just creates these little moments, and these little routes of experience that would not be there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I think so much as, my own personal experience, been in the hospital quite a bit with different surgeries or with family members. It really isn't that dissimilar to a hotel, right? I mean, the service portion, cleanliness, right? Attention. Can I get something when I need it? Even if it's a basic answer, or question or need, about the TVs or about, when, you know, anything could really happen. I feel like that would make a meaningful difference if I had some sort of real time access. And I could see that, perhaps some of those listening today are starting to think about how this could improve their scores and give, some more control to the patients while also reducing some of the workflow on their clinical teams that would, be better routed directly to the source anyhow. I like the idea of starting with maybe a couple of areas or ideas. If I was in a hospital, maybe try to pilot some of your technology and then measure the success, kind of
Yeah,
scale what we learn to achieve a system wide impact. So, Steve, from your experience, what's that biggest insights that you think hospitals gain once they do connect multiple feedback points through your product?
yeah, and it's not just feedback green, yellow, and red, or I want one, two, or three. We also have people counters, noise sensors, huge, huge issue in HCAHPS scores, as well as healing. It's tied to healing. I've been in the
Oh,
hospital
interesting.
all night, couldn't sleep, couldn't heal. So we even have noise sensors. Like, our platform is basically, let's put all these sensors out. Let's understand what's happening everywhere at every minute. And then you bring that data back, and you could either look back at it for a couple of weeks and see that I am having a problem every Thursday at 3 o'clock. Oh, that's because of the shift change. I am having two rooms over here that have a background noise level that's unacceptable relative to the others. I had no idea. I mean, what we keep seeing, another example would be people counting at, let's say, the big restroom in the lobby of the hospital, the first experience visitors, patients, doctors see, just putting up a people counter and correlating that with green, yellow, and red, and figuring out that things go bad when 85 people use it in 75 minutes. So I'm no longer going to go every hour to service this, which is a bad guess. I'm going to wait for our system, which has alerts, to tell you that if it goes bad at 85 people in 75 minutes, send an alert at 80 people in 70 minutes, and that's when you should go. So fully optimize the labor, fully optimize the experience. And just by instrumenting these things up, hospitals, and we're in airports, and we're in convenience stores and places where there's lots of people having lots of experiences all the time. Um, Hospitals can figure out what's going on exactly in the moment and tailor their operations around it, which, I don't care how good a survey is, it's not going to tell you that you're having a problem Thursdays at 3 o'clock. That's going to be really tough to figure out. I always, for some
Yeah.
reason, I was Thursdays at 3 o'clock. I don't know why when I sell the story. Thursdays at 3 o'clock. But it could be, at the shift change. It could be 2 in the morning. It could be, but knowing time and space relative to that feedback, and being able to either look back and reflect on it and figure out how to change, react to it, meaning an alert, or be predictive to it, like I was talking about with the people counters and the sentiment. So
Hmm.
we can provide value all three ways. And you talked about just trying it. We typically say, hey, let's try with your worst floor, your worst area, and let's just try the reflective part. Let's just gather the data for the first 2 weeks. You don't have to change anybody's behavior. Let's just figure out where red, green, and yellow is happening, or let's figure out what people are asking for, or whatever. And then you can build your operations around it, whatever makes sense for you. And so
Yeah,
there's
that's
so many.
really.
Yeah,
I was going to say that's really interesting. You're kind of hinting on like decision making, right, and leadership. When you've worked with Montefiore or other clients, how does this kind of data actually, help those leaders make faster or decisions based on what you've seen?
yeah. I mean, for one thing, when you see the heat map, we have a heat map. Green, yellow, red, day of week, time of day, and you can see that. For example, I think I mentioned this before, but like, you could take one look at that heat map of green, yellow, red of, say, restroom satisfaction. You can see that I start out green, 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 green every day. Green, 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 green. It gets yellow, and then it gets red.
Hmm.
I don't have to examine that. I can look at that, and I can say, my shift, my staffing is peanut buttered. It needs to be lower in the morning and more at night. Because and if I do that, I try that, and then I look at the heat map again, and I can see it smooth over. And if we had a way to display it, I could show you like 3 heat maps from 1 month to next month to next month at a hospital in Kentucky, where they started out just like that. Green went to red. They changed their shift, it evened out, and then all of a sudden the third one was green, green, green all the way through
Oh,
because
very cool.
changed the shift. In some cases, with the 1, 2, 3s in the patient rooms, you can see, are people predominantly calling food service in this one area, during this 1 week? Are they predominantly calling for cleaning when they're double bedded and it's cold outside? Like whatever the trends are, we can help them figure that out. And that's how they're using it in ways that they can't do it with surveys.
Yeah, yeah. And so many of those topics wouldn't be covered in a survey. And people, I don't think, remember the details after the fact anyhow. They just remember how it made them feel. And it either made me feel like I'm cared for, attended to, or I made me feel like I was ignored, or whatever it is. They're going to leave their feeling in a certain way, which is, I think, really the point of the satisfaction scores,
Yeah,
or at the heart of it, right?
and what you just said is spot on. We actually worked with behavioral science PhDs, and they said that people's memories of discrete experiences that you have. So like every time you go to a hospital or an airport or whatever, you're having dozens of different types of experiences. And if you left the whole thing with a bad experience, it's going to paint your memory. So everything looks bad, everything feels bad, and you're going to forget exactly why. And sometimes you don't even know why it's bad. Like for example, you could say there could be a question: were they attentive to my needs? And you could remember the time when you asked the nurse for help with food, and 3.5 hours later, someone came to give you the creamer for the coffee that you're already done with, and that could be terrible. But that could be the nurse's fault. That could be because she forgot to tell
Mm-hmm.
the food service people. That could be the food service people fault because they didn't show up quickly. It could be no one's fault because a nurse is doing a nurse's job and just has to prioritize the clinical over the non-clinical. You don't know, but what we do is we give hospitals this detail that they could never find. Versus, I had a bad experience, just a painting of that
Mm-hmm.
statement. We'll
Yeah,
tell you
why?
precisely.
Yeah, why is it a bad experience? Yeah. Yeah, you're right. They get great clinical care, great nursing, great everything. But it's Sunday, and they wanted to watch the Pittsburgh game, and they couldn't find it on the TV, right? I mean, you just never know, for sure. So that's incredible. So much potential for our organizations to make improvements quickly and easily just by uncovering the hidden things that are happening around the organization, the facility. Um,
Yeah, we do
would love to
things that
ask you
not.
a couple quick questions before we move on, if you're up for it.
Let's go.
All right, here we go. So, what's the best leadership advice that you've ever received?
Don't be a victim. And I touched on this before, but man, that phrase sits on my shoulder every day. Like, don't be a victim, and be accountable. I mean, I'm still learning that. I still have moments where I'm like, oh, someone on my staff complained to me 3 times. Maybe they weren't just complaining. Maybe it's for me to fix. That happened recently, and I realized, yeah, that's on me.
Yeah,
um, and I need to actually be proactive and fix it, because no one else is going to. So don't be a victim, and basically own the situation, and be proactive. I borrowed it from my answer before, but it is just really a big part of how I would like to show up myself, and how
yeah,
I like people. Don't always do it because it's hard, but how I would like to.
yeah. We're not perfect, but I think how we show up is important. I love that focus on there. What's a feedback moment that has made you smile?
You mean in terms of our product?
Yeah,
One
yeah,
one was some our product is supposed to be used to help find insights and help everyone do better. But some organizations use it as rating. Like I'm going to rate the cleaning company that's cleaning my airport. And everyone always asks, like, what if a kid walks up and presses red 50 times? And the answer is, of course, we know that that happens. And the device itself only accepts a vote every, say, 5 seconds. It's a customizable gate. We also do a software layer where we look at aberrant data, right? Something that isn't quite right. And an airport client came to us and said, we're getting too many greens in this one section of the airport. Help us figure out what's going on. And we looked at the data and we realized someone, instead of cleaning, figured out that the gate was 8 seconds in this particular case, and was, instead of cleaning, was standing there and pressing it green every 8 seconds. That's what they were doing during their shift. So we have all these detectors. Our whole solution was built around, hey, let the nurses, let the doctors, let the cleaners of the hospital, the airports, whatever, know when bad things are happening. We never had to let anybody know, give an alert when good things were happening. So we created what I dubbed the integrity detector, and we gave them an alert when there were too many greens in certain areas. And of course, they just correlated that and like, yep, we know who the bad integrity player is. I just thought that was a really funny
That
feedback
is
moment.
funny. Yeah, people are funny. I mean, we do the most entertaining things, really, for apparently no reason. That's awesome. So, yeah, when you're looking ahead, what's next for Feedback Now?
Well, for us, in terms of our product, obviously AI, like everything I just talked about, gets better with AI. So I just talked about simple correlations between, the number of people using a facility and when it goes bad and being predictive in that way. But AI generated alerts. Hey, even though you've got this whole thing instrumented up, it's not hard for an AI engine to notice a pattern that you should notice and take advantage of that information and go be proactive with it. So hey, or I'm noticing a pattern, or I'm noticing something happening that you didn't send an alert on. So injecting AI into our functionality and our roadmap is key. We've already started it, gotten some really great results. I think more sensors. I mentioned noise. There's also linger time. There's all sorts of um, uh, you know uh, temperature and different things that we can do in terms of uh, real spaces that can give insights. So our platform is built to integrate sensors from all types and data feeds of all types. So how is a hospital's operation relative to, I don't know, the traffic near the hospital, or the uh, or the temperature outside, or things like that. And then results like correlating. If we bring back in the HCAHPS scores of a hospital, now we can start to see, okay, for every, I mentioned before, uh, every 1% that you improve our scores is going to be at 0.6% improvement on HCAHPS scores. But what if that was done dynamically, not post? What if bringing back the results can actually help figure out patterns of improvement that we didn't see before? So a lot going on there, but we also need to raise investment and power those AI functionalities, and that's where we're doing next, is going out for a big investment round, and really going to just go gangbusters on those features, sensors, other areas, other geos. So we're hoping to grow in terms
Yeah.
of that, and to really just gather that data. We sound like a hardware company, but really we're a data company that's trying to figure out what's going on with all this data and power operations.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Like, how do we collect information that we're not collecting now, and then what do we do with it? I love that idea of the AI helping to manage that back end process. I just talked to a lot of companies, right, and a lot of people that are innovating all different parts of medicine, from telehealth with nursing to home health to capitated models, but all of it has a theme, which is AI, right? I mean, it's everywhere all the time right now, even here in our industry. We use it a lot for research in particular, not for outreach. I think that's a misstep, but nonetheless, people are using it for various purposes. And I think using it as a manager someone pushes a button because they need something in their room, it's cold, they need a blanket, TV doesn't work, whatever. The back-end AI that then says, hey, no one's actually responded to this person in 5 minutes as a check-in is just real simple back-end thing you can do, right? And then all of a sudden, hey, we have a safety, and that takes zero time literally because it's a computer. So it just makes my mind race with all the different cool things we could do with technologies like yours.
We have to
One of the key takeaways for me, Steve, in our conversation, is that this idea of listening in real time isn't about the data. It's really about acting faster and smarter and with empathy, towards the patient. And so that was really a key takeaway for myself. So I appreciate the conversation. But Stephen, again, thank you so much for joining us and sharing a bit about your story with us here on Beyond the Bedside. You can learn more about how FeedbackNow is helping hospitals turn patients' feedback into meaningful action by visiting www.feedbacknow.com. But Stephen, again, thank you so much for your time. It's really exciting seeing what you guys are doing out there, and I can't wait to see what the future brings.
Thank you so much, Michael. Really great conversation.
Thank you so much.